The code that keeps astronauts alive, the software that controls the very air they breathe aboard the International Space Station, was once stolen by a 15-year-old kid from his bedroom. He didn't use a billion-dollar supercomputer or have state-sponsored backing. He used an ordinary PC, a dial-up modem, and a spark of dangerous curiosity. And the most chilling part? He did it just for fun. This isn't a movie plot. This is the true story of Jonathan James, a teenage hacker who in 1999 brought both NASA and the Pentagon to their knees. The year is 1999. The world is on the brink of a new millennium, buzzing with anxiety about the Y2K bug. The internet is still a wild, untamed frontier. For most of us, it was a place of screeching modems, AOL chat rooms, and websites that took ages to load. Cybersecurity was a niche concern, something for corporations and governments to worry about, not the average person. But in a quiet suburb in North Florida, a 15-year-old named Jonathan James saw this new digital world differently. He didn't just see websites and emails. He saw a sprawling, interconnected puzzle of systems, doors, and locks. And he was very, very good at finding the keys. Operating under the online handle C0MRAD, Jonathan wasn't your typical troublemaker. By all accounts, he was a quiet, intelligent kid. But online, he was a phantom. He began his journey like many early hackers, by testing his skills on local targets. He poked and prodded the networks of the Miami-Dade school system, learning their architecture, finding their flaws. He then moved on to bigger fish, breaching the systems of the telecom giant Bell South. These weren't just harmless pranks. Each successful intrusion was a lesson. He was learning how systems were built, how administrators made mistakes, and how to move through a network completely unseen. He was methodical, patient, and brilliant. But hacking the school district and the phone company was just practice. Comrade had his sights set on a much, much bigger target. One that wasn't even on this planet. In June of 1999, Jonathan turned his attention to NASA. Specifically, the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, a facility critical to the development and operation of the International Space Station. You'd expect NASA to have fortress-like digital security, and they did for the time. But even the strongest fortress is only as secure as its weakest point. Jonathan found that weak point, a server with a poorly configured firewall and an administrator who had made a simple but critical error. Like a ghost, he slipped through the crack. Once inside, he wasn't a bull in a china shop. He was careful. He moved from computer to computer, 13 of them in total, mapping the network. And then he planted his own tool, a piece of malware known as a backdoor. This backdoor gave him persistent, privileged access. It was like he had copied a master key to NASA's digital kingdom. He could now come and go as he pleased, and nobody would know. But what does a 15-year-old do with the keys to NASA? He goes exploring. And what he found was the Holy Grail. He located and downloaded proprietary NASA software. This wasn't just some boring internal memo. It was the source code for the International Space Station's environmental control and life support system. Let that sink in. This was the software that controlled the temperature and humidity inside the living quarters of the ISS. The code that literally managed the physical environment that kept astronauts alive while they were orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. NASA valued this software at $1.7 million. In the wrong hands, this code could be reverse engineered, its vulnerabilities exploited. Someone could, theoretically, manipulate the life support systems on the station. It was a staggering security failure with potentially life-threatening consequences. It didn't take long for NASA to realize something was wrong. Within hours of the download, their system administrators detected the unauthorized activity. But detecting it was one thing. Understanding it was another. They knew someone was inside their house, but they didn't know who, how they got in, or what they had taken. The only safe option was to assume the worst. NASA made an unprecedented decision. They shut everything down. For 21 straight days, critical computer systems at the Marshall Space Flight Center went offline. 21 days. Imagine the panic. The space agency, a symbol of American ingenuity and technological supremacy, was forced to go dark by an unknown digital intruder. Teams of experts worked around the clock, picking through logs, searching for the back door, and trying to assess the damage. This shutdown alone cost the American taxpayers over $41,000 in contractor labor and equipment costs. But the financial cost was nothing compared to the blow to their reputation and the terrifying uncertainty of what had been compromised. You would think that after stealing the literal keys to the International Space Station, a teenage hacker would lay low, take the win, disappear into the digital shadows, and never look back. You would be wrong. For Jonathan James, hacking NASA wasn't the end game. It was a warm-up. He was about to break into a place even more secure, and the data he would find there was arguably even more sensitive. While NASA was still reeling, Comrade was already moving on to his next target, the Department of Defense. And not just any division. He targeted the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. If you've never heard of the DTRA, that's by design. This is the agency within the DoD responsible for reducing the threat from the scariest things imaginable: nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Their job is to analyze and counter threats of mass destruction. It is one of the most sensitive and secretive organizations in the entire US government, and a 15-year-old from Florida hacked it. Using similar techniques, he found a vulnerability in a DTRA server located in Dulles, Virginia. He slipped inside and once again installed a backdoor. From this perch, he became a fly on the wall in one of America's most critical national security nerve centers. He set up a sniffer, a program that passively intercepts data flowing through the network. Over a period of weeks, his sniffer captured a torrent of information. He intercepted over 3,300 email messages passing between DTRA employees. He captured at least 19 usernames and their corresponding passwords, for high-level military computers. He was reading the private, sensitive communications of government officials tasked with protecting the country from its greatest existential threats. He had credentials that could grant him access to even deeper, more classified systems. The scope of this breach was breathtaking. A teenager in his bedroom now possessed the digital keys and private correspondence of a top-secret military agency. He had proven, twice, that the country's most advanced technological and defense institutions were vulnerable. But this time, he had left a trail. His activity at the DTRA, combined with the ongoing investigation at NASA, finally gave law enforcement the breadcrumbs they needed. The net began to close. Investigators from the Department of Defense and NASA, working together, traced the intrusions back, not to a server in Moscow or Beijing, but to a residential address in North Florida. On the morning of January 26, 2000, the digital world collided with the real one. A team of federal agents from the DoD and NASA, along with local police, raided the home of Jonathan James. They burst into the house, surprising the 16-year-old and his family. They seized everything: his computers, his floppy disks, his hard drives. In a detail that sounds almost comical, they even confiscated his Star Trek technical manual, apparently mistaking the diagrams of the Starship Enterprise for evidence of his hacking schemes. Faced with an overwhelming amount of evidence, Jonathan didn't put up a fight. During interrogation, he admitted to everything. He calmly explained how he had breached the systems, what he had done, and why. His honesty was disarming. He wasn't a hardened criminal. He was a kid who had been caught. But because of the severity of the crimes and the targets involved, he wasn't going to get a slap on the wrist. The justice system had to make an example of him. Since he was a minor, he couldn't be tried as an adult, but the consequences were still severe. Jonathan James was sentenced to 7 months of house arrest and probation until he turned 18. He was banned from using a computer for non-school related activities. However, he later violated his probation by testing positive for drugs. The system's patience had run out. He was taken into custody by U.S. Marshals and served 6 months in a federal correctional facility in Alabama. At the age of 17, Jonathan James became the first juvenile to be incarcerated for cybercrime in the United States. It's a distinction that even earned him a Guinness World Record. So what was going through his head? Was he a malicious actor trying to endanger astronauts and compromise national security? Or was he just a kid who didn't understand the consequences? In a rare interview with PBS's Frontline, James gave us a glimpse into his mindset, and it's fascinating. He claimed he was just playing around, having fun. He insisted he meant no harm and caused no actual destruction. He saw the networks as a challenge, a complex puzzle to be solved. The thrill was in getting in, not in what he did once he was there. In his mind, the code he downloaded wasn't a tool that could endanger lives. It was just a trophy. He even stated, with a hint of pride, that he was only caught because he didn't bother to cover his tracks. He said that if he had wanted to remain hidden in NASA's and the DTRA systems, he easily could have. The only reason he didn't, he claimed, was because he didn't believe he was doing anything truly wrong. This perspective is the crux of the whole story. The massive gap between his perception of his actions as a harmless game and the reality of the chaos he caused within the US government. He never released any of the data he stole. He never tried to sell it. He just took it. For him, the victory was in the breach itself. The case of Jonathan Comrade James was a watershed moment. It served as a brutal wake-up call for the entire government. It proved that the greatest cybersecurity threats didn't always come from rival nations with massive budgets. Sometimes, they came from a bored, brilliant teenager with a dial-up modem. His intrusions exposed just how fragile the digital infrastructure of the world's only superpower really was. It forced agencies like NASA and the DoD to completely overhaul their security protocols, to finally take the threat of the individual hacker seriously. Jonathan James showed the world that in the new digital age, power wasn't just about armies and weapons. It was also about information and access. And a 15-year-old kid, armed with nothing but knowledge and curiosity, could wield enough of that power to challenge institutions that had stood for decades. His story is a permanent reminder that the line between a harmless puzzle and a national security crisis can sometimes be just one password away. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We dive into stories like this every week, exploring the hidden corners of history and technology. And let me know in the comments, do you think Jonathan James was a criminal mastermind or just a curious kid who went too far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you in the next one.